Spooky season is finally upon us, and I couldn't think of a better time to talk about one of my favorite horror franchises. Slasher movies have always had a special place in my heart. They provide a sense of nostalgia and comfort I can't get out of any other genre. Halloween was the first horror movie I ever watched as a kid, and I was immediately hooked. I binged half the franchise on AMC that same week, and I followed it up with Nightmare on Elm Street. I think the wires in my brain got crossed at some point during that week, because now I get a warm, fuzzy feeling every time I see Jamie Lloyd stab her sister, or Johnny Depp get turned into a fountain of blood. The Friday the 13th series would have been a perfect fit for that marathon, but I had a little run-in with The Masked Killer a few years earlier, so I stayed far away from the series until I was braver. It took a little longer than I'd like to admit, considering I didn't get around to it until college after my friends and I fell in love with the Friday the 13th video game. We were briefly obsessed with that game, and eventually decided to watch a few of the entries. However, it wasn't until last year when I decided to really dive deep into the franchise. Since that decision, I've watched every single Friday the 13th movie, and I have a ton of thoughts and opinions to share. Some good, some bad, and there's even a few spicy takes in there. So with the intro out of the way, here's my ranking of every single movie in the Friday the 13th franchise. Oh, and spoiler warning for every movie in the series, of course. Number 12.
Jason Goes to Hell.
This is how Jason Goes to Hell begins. It's one of the coolest, most exciting scenes in the whole franchise that is immediately followed up by the most boring movie in the whole series. The opening has everything. It starts out a little spooky with your typical Friday the 13th setup, complete with unnecessary nudity. Then you discover it was the FBI all along doing a goofy little bait and switch. I love that they have an entire squadron of FBI agents that pops out of the trees just to blast Jason with bullets. And best of all, they drop a fucking bomb on him to get the job done, and it still doesn't work. It just goes to show how much of an unstoppable force of nature Jason has become at this point in the franchise. As great as his intro is, I hate to say that the rest is pure trash. All of the fun to be had is used up in the first 5 minutes, and it's a hard plummet downhill for the rest. The remaining hour and a half of this movie is an absolute slog to get through. The story is nonsensical, and not in the fun way like the intro. It's convoluted and completely void of fun. Since Jason got blown up at the beginning of the movie, he's in a slightly different form than we're used to. He's a little demon worm this time, with the ability to possess people. So he hops around from body to body trying to track down his niece and her newborn baby. Apparently, if he's able to infect one of the women in his family, then he can be born in his body again. Which is stupid, but that's the plot. That seems to be a difficult task for Jason, however. He's killed 95% of the characters in this franchise with no problem at all, but he just cannot get his hands on this baby. It's a dumb premise, but at least this information is delivered by my favorite character in the movie, Creighton Duke. Besides the intro, he's the best part of this film by far. Creighton is a bounty hunter, and for some reason, the world's leading expert on Jason Voorhees, even though he's never been mentioned in the series before. I guess Tommy Jarvis was just busy. It doesn't make much sense that he's here, but I'm glad he is. The actor seems to have a really good time with the role, and I start to feel just a touch of enjoyment bubble up every time we get a taste of the Duke.
She ain't had a taste of the Duke yet.
Then that enjoyment is inevitably squashed by the next boring ass scene. There's a ton of ridiculous stuff in this movie, and technically a plot, but none of it stands out enough to really highlight, so I'm just going to move on to why everybody watches these movies. The kills. Since Jason's in demon mode in this one, we don't get to see him operate in the way he usually does, and the kills suffer as a result. There are some oddities, like whenever he shaves the guy for no reason at all, or he bonks two guys' heads together like some type of twisted Three Stooges bit. The silly kills of this nature stand out, but the rest are just as boring and bland as the rest of the movie. However, there is one death scene that makes me cringe. That was a good kill, but I really expected more from old Worm Boy. Overall, this movie sucks, and I kinda hate it. I've always heard it was a miserable watch, and misery is the perfect word to describe how I felt forcing myself to sit through it. If you value your time at all, stay far away from this one. Number 11. So I told a tiny lie during the intro of this video. I did watch one Jason flick before college, Freddy vs. Jason. This movie was like an urban legend around the playground. We were all too young to watch horror movies, but there was all these rumors popping up that there was a movie out there where Freddy and Jason fought each other. That was the coolest and scariest thing my feeble little mind could imagine at the time. But I was 8 years old, so it did have to live in my imagination. I'd be 13 before I was brave and sneaky enough to watch it for the first time. Sorry, Mom.
Shame.
Shame.
I was so naive back then, so easy to please. Even then I was disappointed. but I didn't remember much until I watched it again last week. And it turns out, there were a few things I was right about in my preteens. Even going in with lower expectations, it was even more disappointing than I remember. Yes, you get a Freddy v. Jason standoff, but the rest of the movie is so dull and boring that by the time the big fight happens, you're just begging for it to be over. This is by far one of the slowest and messiest movies in the series. The premise is a big part of that in my opinion. Freddy starts the movie off dead or something. I don't really know. I only watched the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie, which I know.
Shame!
But he's bored of whatever state he's in and he wants to go back to dream hopping. And apparently the only way that he can do this is by having the townspeople believing him again. And his genius plan is to get Jason to go on a killing spree so that the whole town blames Freddy for the murders. So Jason is just kind of Freddy's puppet for most of the movie. It could have been any killer Freddy was able to seduce. In fact, it would have made more sense if it was somebody that could better emulate Freddy's MO. Freddy wasn't exactly known for being the hulking murdering machine after all. He was the funny, silly child murderer. That being said, if you're going to have a killer in your movie, it's always cooler if you can make it Jason Voorhees. He is one of the best at it after all. The initial premise is serviceable, if I'm being generous, but it gets really stupid fast. I know Friday the 13th isn't exactly known for its intricate plots, but this one seems especially forced and somehow still one of the most boring. This is a movie where two of the biggest horror icons of all time fight each other, and I'm yawning checking my watch. How did this happen? This should have had 13-year-old me hooping and hollering at the screen, not fighting off sleep. Thankfully, there are a handful of good kills in the movie at least. Most of them are sort of soulless, but there are some highlights, like when Jason folds a guy up in a bed or twists someone's head around Exorcist style. Or the best one, whenever Jason smacks a woman so hard she hits a tree 15 feet away and dies on impact. Then there is my absolute favorite scene in the franchise, the Cornfield Massacre. Jason's like a kid in a candy store during this scene. He's hacking away at people left and right. They even set him on fire at the beginning and it doesn't even affect him. He's just getting started at that point. Moments like these are why I love Jason Voorhees. He's in it for the love of the game. However, even fun scenes like that and a climactic final sequence aren't enough to save the movie. It's still a really bad film with a few memorable moments that I don't plan on watching again for quite a long time if I can help it. Number 10. This was the first big disappointment in my marathon. I hadn't heard much about the 5th entry, so I expected your run-of-the-mill Friday the 13th movie. Instead, I spent the entire next day ranting about everything wrong with this movie to anybody that would listen. And they say therapy's a waste of money.
They unzip me!
It's not as overtly awful as Freddy vs. Jason, and especially Jason Goes to Hell, and it even captures the Friday the 13th vibe better than anything we'll see on this list for a while. However, there are two big problems with this movie. Number 1. Wait, no. Number 1, Jason Voorhees is not in this movie at all. In case it hasn't been obvious so far, watching Jason do his thing is my absolute favorite part of these films. So it sucks we get a copycat killer this time instead of the real thing, but I think the real problem is how they handled that decision. They could have made it work if they would have put more thought into how they were going to replace Jason. They could have done something similar to Halloween Ends, for example, where Jason's killing spree inspires somebody who's been neglected and abused their entire life to take up the mantle. There are so many ways that they could have cleverly handled this transition, but instead it's just some random background character that we only see for a handful of shots. I had to look up his name while writing this because I don't even think the movie mentions it. It's Roy, by the way. He's the father of the obnoxious kid who catches an axe in the back at the beginning of the film. You know, the most annoying character in the franchise. We don't get to see Roy's journey to becoming everyone's favorite mass killer, but I'm assuming his son's death caused him to spiral off screen. Of course, this leads to him killing an absurd amount of innocent people and completely forgetting to get revenge on the guy who killed his son. Most of the people he takes it out on weren't even there for the murder. It's one of the laziest twists I've ever seen, and it helped turn what could have been an enjoyable movie into one of the worst in the series for me. It's not the only thing that brings the movie down though. The second big problem is that in 1985, the MPA decided they didn't want people to have fun at the movie theaters anymore.
Crap my ass!
So the studio had to censor the hell out of this movie just for it to see the light of day. As a result, very few kills are shown on camera. There are a ton of deaths, but most of them take place off screen, and we almost never get to see the killing blow. It's a real shame. The atmosphere and the on-screen violence is what makes these movies so great. Plus, the crew usually comes up with some creative death scenes and brings them to life with some impressive special effects. It's a shame that their work didn't make the final cut. Luckily, there was a few fun kills that were left in, like when Jason stabs a woman in the eyes with some hedge trimmers. Then another where he tightens a piece of leather around a guy's head until his eyes pop out. I guess Roy really had a thing for eyes. This movie really had potential, but it doesn't seem like they put much thought into what came before or what would come after. I'll only watch this one again if I marathon the whole series, and I don't plan on doing that again for a very, very long time. Number 9.
Jason Takes Manhattan.
I know it's been said before, but this movie is really kneecapped by the fact that they spend so much time on the boat instead of in New York City. It still could have worked though if they actually did something interesting with the change of scenery. But this is a late Friday the 13th movie, so of course they took the lazy route and did almost nothing to use the novelty to their advantage. I would have liked to see Jason terrorizing the streets of New York, but I'll let you get away with the misleading marketing if you actually give me a good movie. Unfortunately, that's just not what we get here. There are some fun bits sprinkled throughout, but everything in between slows down to a snail's pace. Roughly 10% of this movie is worth watching, with the only enjoyable parts coming from the scenes that are so outlandishly goofy they put a smile on your face. It happens way too sporadically for me to call this a good movie or even worth your time, but it has some of the most entertaining scenes the series has to offer. Like when Jason hits a girl in the face with a pink flying V guitar. That makes me laugh every time. Or even better, this scene. It doesn't get more over the top than that, but this is exactly what I want from this shitty movie. I'm here for the schlock, and there is just enough in this movie that I'm glad it exists. Even though I could go without the strange psychic B-plot. I still don't know what the hell was happening there, and frankly, I don't care enough to try to find out. The filmmakers also go out of their way to show that Jason can teleport now. I guess he is supernatural at this point, and we left realism behind in the second movie, so as strange as it is, this doesn't really bother me. If there wasn't so much filler here, I'd say give this movie a watch. But you're probably better off with a highlight reel for this one. Number 8. Yes, this feels like a generic slasher movie from the late 2000s. And no, it doesn't have the charm or the aesthetic of the original films, but this is still an okay movie, even if it is a bit by the numbers. The squandered potential of what a series reboot could have been is frustrating, especially considering we haven't gotten another entry in the series since. But I'd watch this every day for a year before I decided to watch Jason Goes to Hell again. I'd go as far as to say the remake even does a few things better than some of the films higher up on this list. For example, they put more effort into giving the characters personality than they normally do. Don't expect to find anyone as nuanced as Jake LaMotta or even a Rocky for that matter. But at least it takes some time to actually make them stand apart from each other. Especially the douchebag whose cabin the teens are partying at. They want to make this guy out to be an asshole, and my god did they succeed.
He's a real...
I was really hoping this guy's death would be extra gruesome. It was a good one, but not the best in the movie. I'd say the most gruesome death goes to the woman who Jason ties up in a sleeping bag and hangs over a campfire. It's not Jason's typical style, but it's one of the most brutal things we've ever seen him do. He has a more sinister feel to him overall in this one, mainly because of the more realistic, gritty tone they were going for, but there's more to it than that. He acts as more of a hunter here. I've always seen Jason as more of an opportunity killer in the past. He's someone who loves killing and often finds himself in a position where he gets to do what he loves. But he viciously seeks people out in this one, in a way we've never really seen him operate. It's almost like a darker reimagining of the original Jason from Part 2. He's back to being just some redneck in the woods who has a knack for killing people. It feels like an homage to the original concept while still being a fresh take on the character. It's not my preferred Jason, but I do like the change of pace. This is just one example of how you can tell the filmmakers at least had some level of respect for the original run of movies. They didn't capture the tone of the original series at all, but they directly stole elements from several of them. Like the guy who's looking for his sister after she goes missing near Camp Crystal Lake, similar to Part 4. Or how Jason ditches his face sack in favor of the hockey mask he steals from a victim. On paper, this seems like a good Friday the 13th movie. It just needed a stronger sense of direction and writing. For instance, whose idea was it to have a 20-minute long cold open? It has some of the best kills in the movie, but do we really need to spend so much time setting up these characters just to kill them off 20 minutes in and have to do the same thing immediately after? It destroys the pacing. I know they wanted to set up the survivor girl getting killed so that it makes sense whenever we see her brother looking for her later, but that part really could have been streamlined. Which brings me to my next criticism. Why did Jason ever take her prisoner? That's not my Jason Voorhees. He doesn't take prisoners. He's out for blood indiscriminately. I don't understand this decision at all, and I like it even less. That being said, it doesn't ruin the movie for me. It's far from being my favorite, but I don't hate the film. It's saved by the fact that there are some real stinkers in the franchise. Number 7. Whenever I first made this list, I had Part 7 second from the bottom. I was definitely suffering from series burnout at that point, because whenever I went back and watched a recap, I started remembering a ton of great scenes. It gets bumped up a few rankings just for the sleeping bag kill alone. I think Jason is at his best when he drops his weapon and starts relying on brute force. Part 7 also gives him one of his coolest character designs. He's super decayed looking because he's been dead for years and left at the bottom of the lake for a while. It's a little corny looking, but I love it. I'm not sure how I haven't mentioned the main draw of this movie yet. the fact that the survivor girl has psychic powers. It's the most unique part of this movie, but it feels underutilized and honestly kinda gimmicky. It seems like an idea that was cooked up by the marketing team instead of the writers. It still could have been really cool though if they actually did something interesting with the concept. Of course we get a big fight between the two at the end of the movie, but it feels pretty half-baked. Anybody could have sprayed him down with gasoline and set him on fire with or without telekinesis. I am glad that they actually took a risk and did something different though. It sets Tina apart from a series full of copy and paste survivor girls. This one's an okay movie, but I primarily remember it as a wasted opportunity. Number 6. The movie that started it all, Halloween's trashy younger cousin. I have to confess, I feel bad putting it so low on this list, and to make matters worse, I initially had it a little higher. After watching it again though, I just didn't have as much fun with it as I did the next film on the list. It deserves a ton of credit for paving the way for its successors, but I'm honestly surprised the series went on to see so much success considering how flawed this first entry is.
Oh, hi. What are you doing out in this mess?
Especially considering this came out years after both Halloween and Black Christmas. Two movies that are both obvious influences on this film, and two movies I think are better than this one. Don't get me wrong, overall I enjoyed the first movie. It just doesn't hold a candle to the films that inspired it. Although compared to some of the movies mentioned previously, this thing is a masterpiece. Since nobody in 1980 knew what a Friday the 13th movie was, they had to do a little setup this time, which means we actually get a plot. It's about as bare bones as it gets, but it's there. They take some time to establish why these people are at Camp Crystal Lake, and even provide a little of the legend of the cursed camp. The movie has a slow first act as a result, but I think it's needed and it's something the rest of the series could have benefited from. However, it feels like they were unsure what kind of movie they wanted to make with this first entry. It often feels like a whodunit with the trimmings of a slasher instead of an outright horror movie. The slasher parts are great, especially the eye-catching effects work. But as a whodunit, I think it fails miserably. The mystery elements make the movie feel very awkward at times. They have to go to great pains to hide the fact that Mama Voorhees is the killer, primarily by making every kill either a POV shot or happen off camera. Both of which can feel jarring at times and lessens the impact of each kill. It also means they have to hide any part of her body that shows during a kill. So anytime her hands are in frame, they have to quickly cut away when lingering on the aftermath could be more impactful. Keeping the killer a mystery just doesn't seem like it's worth the sacrifices they have to make to pull it off. Especially when the big reveal is such a flop. The killer turns out to be somebody we've never seen or even heard of before.
I'm Mrs. Voorhees, an old friend of the Christies.
They tell the story of Jason's drowning in passing, but using it as the motivation for these murders really comes out of left field. It feels flimsy, and it boils the twist down to the killer being an older woman. A reverse Psycho, if you will, but lazier. Maybe audiences in 1980 had their minds blown by this, but I watched this movie for the first time in like 2017, so I'd been desensitized by the internet for a long time by that point. Plus, I already knew who the killer was, also thanks to the internet. Betsy Palmer does give a good performance as Miss Voorhees, they just don't give her much to work with. They tried to build tension leading up to the big reveal, but it's very clunky, and it's even worse in the climactic chase scene, which goes on for way too long. She chases Alice around to like 4 different locations during their final showdown, all of which play out in a very similar way. I'm probably sounding overly harsh to the movie at this point. I do enjoy it, I just feel the need to defend myself for having such a legendary movie so low on the list. The movie might be slow, but it does a lot of things right. The special effects for one are incredible, they're so visually striking and even cringe-inducing at times, especially whenever they don't hold back on the blood. Tom Savini's work feels like the most innovative thing the film brings to the table, besides the classic summer camp aesthetic. The score also really stands out here. They nailed the vibe of this series right out of the gate. Everyone loves the iconic They're great in every movie, and they were a stroke of genius to add here. That's not all the score has to offer though. The work done on the synths and the strings are also fantastic. The franchise's starting point owes a lot to the films that came before it, but in some ways it feels like a fresh new spin on the subgenre, even if it doesn't have the same level of polish as its predecessors.
You're beautiful when you're angry, sweetheart.
It might not be my favorite film in the franchise, but it's important to the horror genre, and I'm glad it's seen the level of success that it has, even if that success did lead to the creation of Jason Goes to Hell. Number 5. I have conflicting feelings about this movie. On one hand, it has some of the most iconic moments in the series. I mean, Jason finally gets his hockey mask in this one, plus he hits us with the badass harpoon kill. But it doesn't even attempt to include a story. It has a shitty, overused 3D gimmick, and it has some of the corniest characters in the series.
Excuse me, but I believe that's my wallet.
Starting off with the pros. This movie has a cool Jason. As much as I love the lumbering hillbilly from part 2, the Jason in this movie just has a certain finesse to him that was lacking in the previous entry. He looks hulking and menacing, but much smoother than before. This Jason will brutally murder you, and he'll look good doing it. Most importantly, it feels like he's enjoying himself in this one. He's doing what he does best and we're just along for the ride. It's like watching a master at his craft. It's not my favorite rendition of the killer, but it's up there for sure, and his influence on future iterations of the character can't be overstated. I'm not sure the series would have even lasted as long as it did without this portrayal providing such a solid template for what Jason should be. Part 3 also has that low budget charm that I love so much from the early films, while cranking up the violence to new heights. It's a great balance that makes for an entertaining watch. I just wish that there was more of a movie around the vibes and the violence. There's literally no plot here whatsoever. In the first 2 movies, they establish a little about the camp and why the teens are there before shit hits the fan. It's not a very strong plot, but at least they put in a little effort, which is much more than I can say for this movie. I get that coming up with a reason for these movies to exist is difficult, but they didn't even try. It just hops around from one meandering scene to the next, hoping that the cool death scenes will be enough to keep us entertained, which they are. But it prevents me from being able to call this a good movie, especially when combined with how cartoonish some of these characters are. The nerdy Shelly is egregious enough, but the biker gang is on a whole other level.
Can I buy you 2 guys a beer or something?
They wear leather, wield chains, crush beer, and they cause chaos just for the hell of it. I don't think I've ever seen a more cliched group of characters. However, the most eye-catching flaw of Part 3 are the incredibly heavy-handed 3D effects. This is the first true marketing gimmick of the series, and they really lean into it. The film often slows down to a crawl, just to showcase the 3D in ways that almost never add anything to the movie. They all fell out of place, with the exception of the effect where the guy's eyeball pops out of his obviously papier-mâchéed head. I get that 3D was one of the big trends of the 80s, but is a low-budget slasher flick really where they belong? Especially whenever I'm watching at home in 2025. I'm not buying a 3D TV no matter how cool your movie's yo-yo effects are. This movie's heavily flawed, but it's short and entertaining enough to be worth your time. Number 4. This is probably the hottest take of my entire ranking. Jason X slaps, and I don't understand why I get so much hate. I've heard about how stupid of an idea it is to send Jason to space for as long as I can remember. And yeah, it is stupid. Of course it is. But that's what makes this movie so damn fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously, so I'm not sure why audiences did.
Or we can have premarital sex.
Imagine you're a screenwriter hired to work on the 10th entry in what was once a fun, if shallow, slasher franchise, fresh off the heels of the worst entry in the series. How do you approach writing the script? I think the best choice is to mix things up and do something new and off the wall. That's exactly what the writers of Jason X did. They said goodbye to reality and they decided to have a little fun with the IP. The formula had been done to death by 2001, so if sending the big brute to the final frontier can breathe some life back into this franchise, I'm all for it. If they would have actually committed to sending Jason to Manhattan or Hell, maybe one of those movies could have ended up in the number 4 spot, instead of at the bottom of this very prestigious list. Imagine how cool Jason Goes to Hell would have been if we got to see him go toe-to-toe with Satan himself. Jason Voorhees but in space is a premise so ridiculous that it feels like a Simpsons bit, but god does it revel in its silliness. It's filled to the brim with shitty CGI, cheesy one-liners, and enough dead bodies to fill a monastery. But it all feels like this was done with the intention of making a goofy movie that would fit right at home on the Sci-Fi Channel. It doesn't feel like your typical Friday the 13th movie, and because of that, it immediately became one of my favorites. Plus, Jason puts up big numbers in this one. He kills like 10 people before he even makes it to space, and from there takes out most of the crew and an entire space colony without even really trying. These are the types of numbers that Jason only ever dreamed about on Earth. I had a blast with this one. It's definitely become one of my go-tos whenever I feel like putting on a Friday the 13th movie. And for anyone who's upset with its placement on this list, try going back to a less jaded time in your life, before you were as accustomed to Hollywood playing hacky sack with your testicles, and try enjoying this movie for what it is, a shitty slasher movie set on a spaceship. I think you'll find it's much better than you remember. Number 3. I watched this right after the original, and god, the sequel is a huge leap in quality. It stumbles out of the gate with a sloppy recap of the first film, masked as a dream sequence. This part takes up way too much time, but it's followed by a near perfect opening scene. It lets you know immediately that this is an upgrade from the original film in almost every way. It takes its time and it does a great job building tension as the scene progresses. The camera work is dynamic and well thought out, and the whole scene has a level of polish that I don't think is taught for the remainder of the franchise. If the entire film could keep up this level of pacing and quality throughout its runtime, this would be my favorite movie in the franchise by far. Neither are actually maintained, and it still leaps and bounds better than the first movie in both departments. Especially the pacing. This movie is much, much tighter. The kills come frequently enough that there's a constant sense of action, without bloating the kill count to a point where the deaths feel meaningless. It's a nice balance that most of these movies really struggle to achieve. I think if they replaced the scenes of the teenagers fucking around with actual moments of character development, this movie would be perfectly paced and in the same conversations as the original Halloween. It does so many things right, and it captures the Friday the 13th vibe better than any other movie. Plus, it has the most memorable survivor girl by far, thanks to Amy Still's performance. She really brings the character to life, coming off as both relatable and highly intelligent. She's the definite standout of the cast, and gives what might be the best performance of the series. They do really try to hammer home the fact that she has a big brain in some pretty ham-fisted ways, though. Like the old cliche where she kicks a guy's ass at chess, or when she goes on a monologue about the hypothetical state of Jason's psyche. Paul and Ted are also interesting characters, even if the movie doesn't give them much to do besides sit around and drink for most of the runtime. One thing that was better in the first movie, however, were the special effects. The typical horror trope where the sequel is more violent than the original doesn't apply here, which is surprising considering that Hillbilly Jason is doing the killing this time. Speaking of, I have mixed feelings about his first appearance. On one hand, I love the classic design. The bag-headed, pickaxe-wielding redneck is one of my favorite renditions of the character. But on the other hand, I really don't like how human they make him in this one. I get that this is his first outing and they wanted to maintain a sense of realism back then, but it's just not personally what I want out of Jason Voorhees. I like him to be a killer of mythic proportions. I can't fault the movie for it though. They had to start somewhere, and audiences probably wouldn't have been very receptive if they threw realism out the window so early in the series. I just wish that he didn't seem like such a lumbering klutz throughout the movie. It makes him come off as silly rather than scary from time to time. What's harder for me to look past, and the main thing that's keeping part 2 from ranking higher, is its sloppy ass ending. It starts off with Paul and Jason getting into a little bit of a tussle on the floor. The Jason I know isn't going to stand for that, but this is his first outing, so I'll overlook it. What really bothers me is what follows. Jenny runs out of the cabin and stumbles into a shed where Jason has a shrine set up for Mama Voorhees, complete with her severed head as the centerpiece. I think this is a nice touch, no complaints. Until Jenny decides to put on his mom's sweater and tricks the dumbass into kneeling in front of her. This gives her the opportunity to whack him with a machete. Of course, he notices his mother's head behind Jenny at that exact moment, and he's able to block the killing blow. It bothers me that they put so much effort into hyping up how smart Jenny is throughout the movie, just to have her pull this dumb shit instead of actually outfoxing Jason, which honestly doesn't seem very hard to do. Then it's made even worse whenever Paul pops up out of nowhere to save her. Jenny! Like I said, Jason is still getting used to the whole murder thing. Paul comes in to play the distraction long enough for Jenny to cleave Jason in the neck. Then they go back to the cabin for one last unnecessary fake out before a maskless Jason jumps through the window ready for round 2. Then cut to Jenny being hauled away in an ambulance with no explanation of what happens to either Jason or Paul.
Where's Paul?
They just load her up and roll credits. It's incredibly jarring, and it's like they just added a twist because people liked it so much the first time. Plus, it left the door open for sequels in the future, which granted really worked out for them. In the end, they wringed this franchise dry, and I'd still gladly pay money for a new entry. Despite the insane ending, it's one of my favorites. It's the first thing that comes to mind whenever I think of Friday the 13th, and it's the one I put on whenever I'm in the mood for a classic slasher. Number 2. This is the first entry on the list I can comfortably call a well-rounded movie. It's still a trashy slasher flick, but it has a level of polish that makes it stand out from the pack. The studio started throwing much more money at the franchise beginning with the third film, which I'm assuming they blew on sick yo-yo effects.
That was close.
This movie had a very similar budget to its predecessor, but without the 3D gimmick, so it feels more like a proper 80s blockbuster than any other title. It doesn't replace the campy, low-budget charm of the original trilogy for me, but I'm glad they took things up a notch here. It seems like they put in a lot of effort to make the highest quality product they could. The most obvious example of this can be seen in the cinematography and camera work. The intro from part 2 might have the best cinematography in the series, but part 4 has the most consistently impressive camera work. The final chapter isn't going to be winning any Oscars, but it seems like they put some real thought into the framing and blocking this time around, especially during the kill cams and establishing shots.
Ted! Hey, Ted, where the hell's Corkscrew?
It's no Citizen Kane, but I've seen enough low-budget horror movies to appreciate whenever filmmakers actually put in effort. This one also has some recognizable actors in it. Not a first for the series, but we don't usually get two in the same film. We get a pre-Goonies Corey Feldman and a pre-Meltdown Crispin Glover, both of which give a memorable performance. Along with the rest of the cast for that matter. This is probably the most interesting group of characters the series has to offer. There's no one as memorable as Jenny from Part 2.
Where's Paul?
But this is the most well-rounded group overall. Each of them have unique quirks that set them apart from each other, as well as chemistry together that is usually lacking from these movies. Plus there's an adorable dog. Actually scratch that. Some of these characters even have motivations outside of getting their dicks wet. There are a couple whose entire goal is quite literally to get laid, but there's also a guy who's out for revenge. He's on the hunt for Jason after his sister was punished for committing the cardinal sin of slasher movies back in Part 2. Nothing much ever comes of his quest, and he ends up spending more time trying to get his dick wet than he does looking for Jason. But hey, at least they tried. Luckily, the Jarvis family is there to pick up his slack. This is the family living next door to the teens' party cabin, and they're the real standouts of the bunch. This is our introduction to Tommy Jarvis, likely the best character in the series, mainly because his story gets told over the course of 3 movies. He's the closest thing Jason has to a foil, and their rivalry gets kicked off here. Tommy being a kid, he just wants to do the things that young boys do. Play with his dog, make weird monster masks, and spy on his hot neighbors. But Jason really doesn't like peeping toms, so he goes after Tommy and his older sister. However, they take down the big bastard with his own machete. It's probably the most iconic Jason death, thanks to the effects work of Tom Savini. This was Savini's return to the franchise after kicking things off in the first film. He sends us off with an impressively disgusting death at the climax of a very entertaining movie. That is, unfortunately followed up by one of the biggest stinkers in the franchise. But as I'm sure you figured out by process of elimination, that stinker preceded what I think is the best example of what Friday the 13th can be. Number 1. Jason Lives has everything you could want out of a Friday the 13th movie. It's over the top, but it's never too campy. It has a strong story, but it doesn't take itself too seriously. Tommy Jarvis is back and he's better than ever, and of course it has badass Jason providing some badass kills. The filmmakers really understood what makes these movies work. They took the strengths of the series and leveraged them to make an incredibly entertaining movie by prioritizing structure, pacing, and most importantly, fun.
Does he think I'm a farthead?
The film starts off insane, and it maintains that insanity all the way through, resulting in what I think is the most entertaining movie in the franchise. It starts off with the best rendition of Tommy Jarvis we've ever gotten, hightailing it to Jason's gravesite. We've thankfully left emo Tommy behind in the 5th movie and replaced him with a new, charming, everyman Tommy. This version might be dumb, but at least he doesn't give off the vibe that he secretly wishes Jason would just end it for him. This Tommy is the only character in the entire franchise, including his previous iterations, that feels like an actual protagonist. He's not just another victim. He's forward-thinking and pragmatic. Although, I guess he has to be, considering he's the one that brought Jason back to life in the first place. The man's been dead for years at this point. What made you decide that this lightning storm was the perfect time to go check out his corpse? He definitely fucked up, but at least he tries to remedy the situation by warning the town and putting a stop to Jason. Again. The resurrection of Jason at the beginning is super cliched and cheesy, but I'm all here for it. It finally makes Jason supernatural, completely ditching realism in favor of raising the stakes.
Oh, boy.
Zombie Jason is my personal favorite Jason Voorhees. Not only because of the decaying, maggot-infested character design, but because this is the deadliest Jason on the list. He might not have the highest body count, but he moves like a predator. Like he's making up for time he lost while he was in the grave. The movie uses the supernatural elements to its advantage too, by extracting the comedy from his over-the-top brutality. This allows the movie to strike a very interesting tone between horror and comedy that no other film in the series even attempts. This is his greatest strength in my opinion, and it works almost every time. It really rides the line between horror and comedy with grace, and I just can't give it enough props for that. It's still mostly a scary movie, but the comic relief is blended perfectly with the horror scenes, so it never feels out of place. Like when Jason yanks a guy's arm so hard he accidentally rips it off, and he just stares at it like he's surprised by his newfound strength. It's dark, it's over the top, and it's fun. Then there's my absolute favorite moment of the movie, whenever Jason slits the throat of a guy who's driving an RV. When Jason climbed out of the RV and stood on top of it as it burned, my roommate and I were cheering at the screen like we were little kids again. It's one of my favorite moments I had during the marathon. I love this movie. It's a great popcorn flick that combines and refines all the best elements of the series while adding some new ones that further improve the formula. If you only watch one movie from this entire list, it should be Jason Lives. So that's it for my ranking of the Friday the 13th franchise. I hope you can tell how much I love this franchise, even if I did spend a fair amount of time criticizing it. Even the criticisms were made with love. The flaws of the series are what makes it so much fun. With the exception of Jason Goes to Hell, because fuck that movie. At the end of the day, I just want as many quality entries into this series as we can get, and I hope more start coming sooner rather than later. I know the licensing issues were finally resolved, and a new movie was announced during the making of this video, so fingers crossed we get to see Jason on the loose again in the not too distant future. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. This is the first video I've ever made, so if you have any suggestions or feedback on ways I could improve, let me know in the comments below. One last thing, next week I'm going to be streaming the first 2 Resident Evil games over on Twitch, so check out the link in the description if you're interested. And don't forget to like and subscribe while you're at it. Now I'm off to see if the servers are still up for the Friday the 13th game. I miss that shit.